let me see if you can just introduce yourself before you get started, just so
Oh
we
yeah,
have that
sure.
the
Yeah,
interview.
yeah. So I'm Mike Canton, and I'm on WYEP in Pittsburgh. I'm a volunteer host and producer of a show called The Soul Show. And less importantly for this conversation, I have a syndicated version of the same show on the African American Public Radio Consortium. So as Jessica said, I'm in and out, but I would say it's for good reasons, because I will say that this activity inspired me to do more. But what ended up happening is that that more got crazy, and I have spent a lot of time getting involved with WYEP to make things better. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's been happening. Um, Maybe it will inspire you too and help you find ways to do things. I think one of the operative words here is volunteer. So I am not on staff. What that means is that you have to come in the quiet way and influence. And sometimes what you do is seize opportunity. So I have these slides. You don't even have to flip through them, but I did them so that you'd have something, to look at later. But I called this seizing opportunity. And let me give you some background on what happened in the past year. So WYEP issued a statement of commitment to Black Lives Matter immediately after George Floyd. And I think what it did really was it was a self-reflection on realizing that there were things that they needed to do better. Okay. The next line in my slides, Jessica, I realized I made a very important boo-boo. It should have said, notably, people of color have not been in staff decision-making roles in over 15 years. That changed everything, because one could see how that had an effect on everything that they did. I won't go through the whole list of things that I responded with, but I saw an opportunity here to write back to upper station management. And I delineated a lot of the impacts that not having people of color on staff had on the station. And I suggested that I did not challenge them on the whys of that situation. But what I did say is that with the people of color who were in volunteer and host production roles, they needed to capitalize on us more to fill the gap until they did whatever they were going to do in the future. That would be in terms of programming initiatives, in terms of community outreach. One of my favorite examples is that when it's festival time and they start deciding who should introduce whom, there were times where I should have been there when in fact the station didn't even know the artists that well, but I played them on my shows. So it was a natural thing for me to get involved. So I gave them that as an example of one of the things that could be done much better. Well, there were some immediate outcomes. One first thing was that the head of the combined stations, which is WYEP Music, WESA, NPR, wrote right back and says, yes, Mike, we need to do better. And he says, we'll be getting back with you. And in fact, that they did. And so I'm going to go through some things that happened. One was over Thanksgiving. That's one of the many times when the station just needs a break. And so they want to put on just a litany of music within a theme and just walk away and let it run, playlist style. Well, they asked me if I wanted to help with the Thanksgiving with Motown Special, and I said, absolutely. But what I did was I insisted that we expand the mission to give some educational narrative. The thing about Motown is that it's what a lot of people see as the Black music that was in the 60s. They can't discern it from Stax label or Philly International. It's Diana Ross, but it's probably also Otis Redding, which is not true. And it is also Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and that is not true. So I said, look, we're going to tell a story here. So what I did is I laid out all of the artists, and then I threw them into brackets like the film era of Motown, when Diana Ross was doing films and when a lot of the artists were doing soundtracks. I did the child acts who moved on to become adult acts. And I had a lot of themes like that, the singer-songwriters. I came up with about 15 of them and broke down the whole thing. And then we distributed it appropriately. And then I took the initiative to do the narrations for all of those segments. This isn't something that the station does for even their own stuff, but that was an opportunity I could not waste. It was a huge success. Okay. Another thing that happened to me was that I was invited into their annual singer-songwriter competition as a judge. The next thing that happened, and this was huge, they asked me for the ideas for Black History Month special programming. They took my list, added nothing else to it, and selected from my list and picked one. I didn't want to ramrod. I just wanted to say, here are about 5 or 6 things. And you said, you have that many? I said, I've got tens of them. I do this every Black History Month. They don't even know because I'm not involved in their programming day to day. But they looked at it and they said, okay, we see what we want to do. And so not only did they select one of my ideas, but they let me participate in the execution. And the other thing that I did was that was the time when I was able to get the other people of color to get involved in the production and the music selecting and even the voicing of the promos that we were doing. And what happened in my show was, since I knew what they were doing, I could dovetail much better and support their themes in my show and vice versa. We never do that very well. It felt like one, okay? And so I've just got a couple more things. There was a workshop that we were going to start doing. It was like this kind of a talk show thing with listeners. And the first theme was going to be Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who's getting inducted, who should be considered, who has never been, what makes us mad. And I was able to add flavor that they really hadn't had before. And so that was great. And then the last piece that's about to happen is that the 50th anniversary of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On is coming up. And they asked me for ideas. And I said, let me get you some people of that age. Those were people who were like 65 and over, who lived it as early adults, to tell what that album meant to them. And so that's going on right now. And I think that's going to be fantastic. And that's all I have to say. I don't want to bore you with more, but I think that was a quick splash of what's happened.
No, I mean, I think that all of that is like, it's movement. And what struck me is like, it all kind of came from like you responding to an email and like really trying to engage and like get into the mix. I mean, like in whatever method you try to, I don't know, whatever method you feel like is going to work to like connect with the programming folks, like they were responsive, they were open, like, I don't know. I just feel like when I heard this story, I was like, that's exactly what like we want to be inspiring, like, you know, all the programmers that we're talking to be doing, is not to be like totally feel defeated or feel like nothing can change or feel like there's no movement, but like all of the things that Mike is talking about and is now involved in and probably is very, very busy with all came from that one initial response to their statement, you know? And the challenge, not in an aggressive way, but to do more and do better, you know?
Oh, I got one more that's really, really important. We're adding another show. We're adding another show of Black music. That is huge. It was my protege who was allowed to start his own show, and I've been working with him, and we kick it off first week of May. That's huge. We needed more. Okay, let me shut up again. I forgot that one. I was really proud about that one. Sorry.
No, it's great. It's really great. I'm really happy to hear all this stuff. And I don't know if anybody else has questions or whatever, but you know, I just wanted to make sure that everybody here is aware that the conversations that we're having they don't just exist in this Zoom box. They're traveling beyond this. I talk to people all the time that are talking about conversations they're having for the first time with their superiors and their friends and, you know, coworkers and stuff. And I don't know, I just want you guys to know that it's important. And, you know, like it's the work is still, it's obviously ongoing, but it's like change is happening, and that feels like,
Yeah.
you know, that feels really good.
Any
Does anybody
questions,
have any
anybody?
questions? Yeah. All right.
Okay,
well,
cool.
I'm going to stop recording you. Mike, thank you so much.
Sure, you bet.
I have a question, Mike.
Oh, sure.
So I was just curious to know, like, the special programming or the ideas that you presented for Black History Month, the station being receptive to that. On their own, has the station like suggested or kind of brought up the idea of doing programming year round like that, like outside of Black History Month, adding, I heard they added a new show, but have they suggested on their own like any other changes outside of February?
Yes, let me give you one example, which wasn't really, it's not new programming per se, but one of the rules at WYEP is for standard programming, non-specialty show, the only music that can be pulled for airplay is what resides in the building. Because of Thanksgiving with Motown, a whole lot more got added to the building, and it is now part of their permanent stock. That gives people more latitude in what to play. Okay. Willie Hutch, obscure Motown artist to many, did film work. That will be played. I don't think it's been played before on standard programming at the station, but there it is now. If somebody goes in and looks for some Motown, they can pick that because they have their menus that they have to go through during their regular day. For AAA programming, the host gets to say, okay, it's time, I can play a Motown or a Stax. Okay, I'll play a Motown. Oh, here's some Willie Hutch, click. And so that's changed. That's one example. In terms of ongoing, well, this decade is a huge one in terms of albums of 50 years ago that were really important. There's all kinds of stuff that's going to happen this year. Many artists have their 50th anniversary albums this year, the 50th anniversary of their albums. And so those features like Marvin Gaye's What's Going On are going to pop up more. And I think they're going to think more about Black history and Black programming when they pick the albums they're going to feature. Does that help?
That's great. And I just was curious about, like, kind of, you know, what steps a lot of the stations are taking on their own, you know, kind of like their own volition. But that's really cool to hear that you're able to add a whole new block of music into the library. That's amazing.
I think another thing that happened was I have been doing special themes on Saturdays on my own without talking to them for years. They're now looking at my list and it's giving them idea. Okay, here's a really good example. For Women's History Month, one of the ones I picked, I told them I was going to do Second to None. The theme was artists who were backups, who elevated to being front and center. The music programming lead said, that is an awesome idea. We're going to use that in the future. So they never did that before. It won't be Black music, maybe, but they're listening to me now.
That's progress. It feels like progress.
Yeah. And you know what? They're going to look back at my playlist and see what I did for Second to None. And so when they do theirs, they're going to pull some of my stuff because they're people they never heard of before. They're going to look at my playlist and pull things out. I guarantee it.
So, like, okay, on the intellectual property tip though, right? Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, like, what is there any conversation about somebody being at the table and actually having the editorial say so to do it without having them accept your idea.
No.
If that makes sense.
Yes. And the answer is no.
Yeah. And what would it take for that to happen? That would be like the next step.
Yeah, maybe for me to actually be an employee.
Yep.
I mean, quite honestly, and I'm not sure what I want to do there because I like having the editorial freedom that I don't think I would have if I worked for them. It's a complicated situation. I'm not saying it's negative, but I'm not sure I'd want to give this up. I like doing what I want to do. They don't even ask me. I injected myself into their lives, but they've only tried to inject onto me a few times. And those were some of the things I talked about in the letter, that shouldn't happen. It should be a discussion.
I want
thank
to
you.
hop in and ask a question too.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm chilling at a hospital right now. It's a long story.
And what happened to your palm trees?
Oh, I ain't walking the streets today, but don't worry, man. They're not palm trees, the regular ones, the deciduous, I believe, but don't worry. I'll be back on the block when the weather's right. My thing, I love your approach to all this, by the way, man. Mad respect on that. And I wanted to ask about your thoughts on the idea of or on the premise of how do you, in having these discussions, in your opinion, how do you not only effectively achieve, but also measure the impact of the premise of accountability as something beyond an action that's created from a sense of wrongdoing or guilt within an infrastructure.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, I did capitalize on, I think, a sense of underachievement on their part. I think they bared their souls, and we're happy to see some solutions right then. I think that they are recognizing that just from a future growth standpoint, they need to change their programming to be more inclusive. So this is also a business decision. But the other thing that they mentioned, which has some merit, not 100% merit, is that they did not know how much to pull on the volunteers, knowing that we already give them our hearts and soul for free. I gave them permission to do this. And now whatever they ask me, I never say no. And that's why I'm so busy. Whatever they ask me, I say, let's do it. But in the future, I think they're going to know that we can help them more. One could argue about whether they're exploiting us. One of the things that I feel as a volunteer is this is what I signed on for. And I recognize that in their formula, a show like mine, they don't think could pay for itself on its own merits, but it must be done. That's the community aspect of it. I have to give this effort to make that happen.
As somebody who's part of a volunteer infrastructure, I completely understand that. Being the only hip hop show for a while at times, and the only hip hop show that's run by a Black person, and the only hip hop show that's run by a person who can connect with the actual community and an artist in that community and a representative who can be the example.
Yes,
but not the be the example rather than the token.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Word. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You always have great questions.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time. And obviously Mike is around if anybody has more questions to ask, or, he's on the call when he can be, but he is a very busy man, but is definitely accessible via email. So if anybody's trying to get in touch, just let me know. And Mike, thank you so much for popping in and sharing.
My pleasure. And like I said, Jesse, you inspired me to do a lot of this. You got my wheels spinning about what I could do to make things better. And when that letter came out from them, I said, okay, this is the spot. They bared their souls. I can jump in right now.
Well, I hope they continue to kind of push the envelope and expand the programming in the library and whatever else, that needs to get done to kind of balance things out over there. But I'm happy that they're so receptive to all your ideas and stuff.
I'm very optimistic. I don't think they can stop us now. It's changed. We got it.